Hello Dragon City players. What does everyone want playing Dragon City? A heroic dragon, the best dragons in the game. The hardest to get though. Only one way to get them really is through the heroic race, winning the heroic race. So difficult to do. If you've got the right strategy, you can do it. So what we've got now is a guide to tell you how to win the heroic race each time you do it. I've won about 25 heroic races, got about 25 heroic dragons. You can see them here. And I'm going to show you now how you can do it yourself. So strap in, let's get going. Now there are two ways to get the heroic dragon in the heroic race. The first obviously is to win as long as you get to lap 5, that's the qualifying lap. Or you can get to level 15, even if you finish 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 8th, if you get to level 15 you still get the dragon. Technically you can go all the way to level 30, although I don't think it's actually possible to get there. If you do, I'd love to see it, put it in the comments. Now we're going to start with some tips on preparation. Being prepared is everything in winning the race. Now an important thing to remember is that you are seeded by level. So depending on the level you are, you'll be matched with players that are of a similar level. So that is really important. So the easiest times to win is really between level 50 and 100. Before level 50, the challenge you're going to have is getting to level 5 because you're not going to have enough of the food farms and hatching spots and so on. So when you're at below level 50, have a go, see if you can get to level 5. If you can, you're probably going to win, which is a pretty easy way to get there. Once you get past level 100, you're up against some serious players, investing some serious coin, and you'll end up needing to basically get to level 15. Otherwise, you won't be able to win. So ideally, when you're in that sweet spot, you're past level 50, try and crack up as many wins as you possibly can while you're in that time period. So the second tip is you need to log in regularly. If you're not logging in regularly, then you're not going to win. You need to actually be logging in. I'd be aiming 4 times a day, at least each morning, each night. If you don't log in regularly, what's going to happen is you're just not going to get enough turns in there. And remember, it is a race, so others are going to be logging in regularly. If you want that dragon, you've got to put in the time, you've got to put in the hours, just log in regularly, do your turns, and you will be all good. So the next tip is one around gems. You want to start with at least 100 gems. Gems are a key to winning the race. You can get there through, if you're on a low level, you're only trying to win at lap 5 or 6, you can do it without gems. The problem is you need to be able to use the gems to skip time, something that's essential. So what you don't want to do is miss out on a race on a last lap or something because you just needed 20 gems or something just to finish off and get the win. So always start with about 100 gems. Just come in cashed up and you're good to go. Now the next tip, of course, is being prepared is making sure you've actually got somewhere to put your dragons. So you need to have spare space in your habitat, so make sure you do have some habitats there. There's nothing worse than you hit a point of a challenge where you need to breed some dragons and you've got nowhere to put them. That's not going to work out too well. And then you spend waiting 8 hours waiting for yourself to build a brand new habitat or upgrade a habitat. So make sure you upgrade your habitats, build your habitats, and you've got space to hatch dragons because you need to hatch a whole bunch through. Even if you're recycling and selling them as you go, you're still going to need to hatch a bunch. So have as much spare space as you possibly can. And in terms of dragons, also what you're going to do is have some dragons that you've got already hatched. And if you have hatched some just recently before the race, don't feed them. So leave them at level 1. You're going to need to do a lot of feeding. And ideally what you want is low-level dragons to feed. You don't want to be having to spend huge amounts of food just to get credit on feeds. And you do get feeding credit even at low levels. So it does, once you get to a very high level in your laps 12, 13, 14, you actually do need to feed. You can't feed at a low level. They've got to be high-level dragons. But in most cases, early in the race, you want your cheap feeds you can get away with. So have some spare dragons sitting there is ideal. So the last tip in preparation is know when the race starts. It sounds pretty obvious, but there's nothing worse than you haven't logged into Dragon City for a few days, you log in, find the race started 3 days ago, and the other competitors are 3, 4, 5 laps ahead of you, and it's pretty well over and done with, or it's a big fight back to try and get a win. So watch when it starts, make sure you're there right from the beginning. You can get yourself a really good head start on all the other competitors. You might say, well, when is that? When are these races actually going to start? How would I find out? Dragon City, you've got a great Facebook page. They post regularly on there any upcoming events, not just heroic races, but other things as well. So you can see here, it's a pretty good Facebook page. I'll put a link to the Facebook page in the description so you've got it there. But if you go into Facebook and search Dragon City, you can find it pretty easily. So now let's get into the tips for actually winning the race now that you're all prepared. So these first two are fairly closely related, so we'll go through them both at the same time. So the first is, it is a race, so treat it like a race. You are racing against other competitors. Assume you don't get to level 15, then only one person gets the heroic dragon. So treat it as a race, keep track of where the other competitors are, and keep track of what they're doing. So what you want to do is make sure you're staying in front of them, you're staying up to speed, and you know where you're at with them. So you only need to beat your competitors too, so don't go overdoing it. If you're looking and keeping track and it looks like the other competitors are only going to get to level 6 or 7, or lap 6 or 7, there's no point you going all the way to lap 15. You're just probably ending up burning up gems or something getting there. So play to your opposition. And the other thing is that to start fast. This is not while it is a long race, you do need to get a head start, and really you need to be aiming for to be on past lap 3 in the first day, ideally. That's a bit of a challenge if you're only in an early, low level about 50, 60 or so, and you're only going to get to level 5. Then really, if you can get through the first lap in the first day, that's fantastic. But you can get a really good head start there. What you will find is if you're trying to get to lap 15, the levels 12, laps 12, 13, 14, they will take you at least a day to get through. You get some really big numbers of hatchings and food and so on you need to do. So you need to allow for that. So make sure you get a really strong start, aiming for ideally clearing the first 3 laps in the first day if you possibly can. So the next tip is really important. It's gems, spins and towers, and using them strategically. So these are critical. You need to use your gems, spins and towers to skip yourself along, or you will find it very difficult to win a race. We talked about having 100 gems. You also get 1 spin per day as a bonus that can skip your head and can actually skip the entire node through, which is great if you can pick that up luckily. And also you've got towers. If you're at a higher level and you've managed to get them, they can skip your breeding time and your hatching time, and you need to use them strategically, obviously, because they need time to recharge, and you only probably get 2 shots of those each race that you'll have. Now, so we've got a few examples here of where you have challenges that you simply can't do in one stint. These tend to revolve around food or breeding or hatching primarily. So you see one where we've fallen too short and we've used all our food. So if we didn't now use a gem like we just did there to skip straight through, then we'd be waiting potentially another 5 hours or 8 hours through to get the next shot, which is a huge amount of time to chew up. Here we start off with 16. We've only got 14 farms, so we can't possibly do that full 16 in one stint. So what we do is once we've selected it all through, we've picked up all our food, what we'd do is we'd probably use a gem or a spin to quickly skip through that, particularly if we're neck and neck and trying to catch up on someone. Never use these things on fights, because fights are just a matter of time. You can see one with 8 breeding. You can't breed 8 dragons all at once. So this is a really, breeding and hatching are the best ones to use your spin on. And what you do is it's good to use your spin first, because sometimes you get a free node one where you'll actually skip through the whole node. Here we only got 1, which is painful when you only get 1 box. It's still better than nothing. But ideally you get the spins where you get a full free node, which is amazing. And if you've got the towers that can help you spin through, then they're useful too. So the next tip's really around strategic play. So don't touch anything unless you get credit for it in the race. So if you've got a habit of logging in each time you do and collecting your gold and your food, which is a good habit to have, don't do it now. The last thing you want to do is collect up all your food, hit to regrow, and then the race tells you now need to collect food because and then you're going to sit and wait for that. That's a really bad thing to do. So don't do that. Don't collect anything unless the race has asked you to do it. The next thing is the single most frustrating thing in the game, which is the recharging. When I say recharge, this is where you only get a certain amount of things you can collect or tasks you can do in a certain time period. It's very hard to estimate what that is, but it seems to be every sort of 3 to 4 or 5 hours or so. But it'll only let you do a certain number of things. It's very hard to gauge that. You can tell though when you've hit that point, because it'll stop putting up the things that show you that you've got a credit for something, and we've got a couple of examples of them here. So key thing is if you see that that's stopped, stop collecting that thing. So stop hatching that dragon, stop collecting that food if it's happened. So we've got a couple of examples here to show you how that happens. So we've got a couple of examples for you. This first one's hatching. You see that little flower there? When you hatch a dragon, you should see that pop up. That means you've got credit for getting the hatch. But you'll see when we go and place this dragon in, we don't get one. It didn't pop up at all. It's super frustrating because you just used a hatching and you didn't get credit for it at all. You see we haven't gone to the third one. Very frustrating. This next one's food. You see we'll get credit. You see those flowers popping up there that we're getting. But when we hit to that second to last one, there was one and then there's not one there. So you want to stop there. You don't want to do the last one. I'm just going to repeat it here because essentially it runs out and there's no point touching that last one because we're not going to get credit for it. The last tip here is just to have some race awareness and know whether you think you're actually going to win this race or not, the race you're in. You can't win every race. It's just the reality of it. It's hard when you're in a role, you've invested a lot. But if you're looking at it and there's not a lot of time left and you're a fair way behind, you just have to make a call. Do you pull out and stop investing in that race or do you keep pushing forward? Make sure if you are really competitive at the end, you do actually push hard because you might have the other competitors really pushing hard at the end too. So make sure you do that. Don't waste races that you can't win, but then don't lose races when you're in there and you should be winning. Here's a really simple example. We're a full lap behind, half an hour to go. There's no chance of winning this. We should just pull out and stop investing. So there you have it. There's all the tips to win most of your heroic races. Of course, just a reminder, be prepared. Treat it as a race. Start fast. Use your gems, spins and towers strategically. Don't touch anything unless you get credit for it. Watch for when you need to recharge and know when to hold and when to fold. And then we've got a couple of bonus tips for you just to follow up. Now, a couple of extra bonus tips just because there's some really frustrating things that happen in the game around when do you actually get credit for doing something. What will happen is in the later laps of the race, what you do is you find that even though you're clicking on, for example, collecting food or hatching a dragon, that you actually don't get credit for it. Even though you should still be restocked, it shouldn't have run out of your allocated sort of selections or actions for the recent hour or half a day, but you miss out. And what often happens is if you're not at a high enough level of the particular thing you're doing, then it does impact it. So with food, a good example is if you're restocking at 150, that might be fine for the first couple of laps, but pretty quickly you'll start getting only 1 every 3, 1 every 4. It will actually give you credit. So what I've found is it's a balance of time versus how much credit you get, and $1 million is a nice sweet spot. You can go for 3 is fine, but it's that extra 3 hours of recharge time slows you down. $1 million seems to be a pretty good sweet spot, although when you do get past lap 12 you need to shift to 3 million or you won't be getting much credit. Most of the ones won't actually give you credit, unfortunately. The second one is dragon quality because that impacts too. So obviously if you're doing common dragons, then they're going to hatch and breed a lot quicker. But what you'll find is that you don't get credit for them past the early laps. So rare tends to be best, a bit like a steak. You can go for epics; they take a bit longer. Don't worry about legendaries; they take too long. But if you stick with the commons, you'll find later in the later laps you won't be getting your credit for them. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked the video, hit like. Feel free to subscribe, and thanks for watching. See ya.